Hello, I'm Chard Denord, the Poet Laureate of Vermont, and welcome to Poets Speak. Today I'm very pleased to welcome to the studio Kerrin McCadden, who is the author of Landscape with Plywood Silhouettes, the inaugural winner of the 2015 Vermont Book Award, as well as the 2013 New Issues Poetry Prize, chosen by David St. John. She's the recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellowship, a Vermont Studio Center Fellowship, and the Sustainable Arts Foundation Writing Award. Her work has also received support from the Vermont Arts Council and the Vermont Arts Endowment Fund. Her poems have appeared in Best American Poetry, the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day series, and in such journals as American Poetry Review, Beloit Poetry Journal, and Prairie Schooner. A graduate of the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College, she teaches English and creative writing at Montpelier High School. She's also the associate director of the Conference on Poetry and Teaching at the Frost Place in New Hampshire. She lives in Montpelier, Vermont. Well, Kerrin, welcome to Poets Speak. I was wondering if you could start us off by reading a poem.
Sure.
And you certainly can pick a poem that you'd like to read, or I could suggest one. What would you like to do?
Well, I think it'd be really fun if you suggested one.
You know, I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, to read the last poem in your book, Landscape with Plywood Silhouettes, because it kind of reads like an Ars Poetica.
I will happily read that.
In a way, and of course you can read several others during the half hour.
Well, thank you. This is Say Sing. This is my one life. Say you know. Say this means many things. Say snowy owl. Say 3 feet of snow. Say kestrel. My one life is here at the table next to me. Say you know. Say fine night for soup. Glad to have you. How was your drive? Say there is only one ridgeline worth knowing, one swale between 3 hills. Wonder why the mountains are named Lord's Hill, Devil's Hill, and Burnt Mountain. Say we should go there sometimes when we are lonely like this, stand in the center, gear shouldered, and wonder where to camp. Say bear claws and hawk circles. Say grass chewed low. Say here, one life, settle in with us. Here is the fire. Say here is a warm stone. Say sing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
I was wondering how that poem works as a kind of Ars Poetica for you. I mean, many of your poems, most of your poems in this beautiful book, Landscape with Plywood Silhouettes, which won the Vermont Book Award in 2015, are pretty long poems. Mm-hmm. And so suddenly you decide, it seems kind of sudden, at the end of the book to punctuate all of these beautiful narrative lyrical poems with a kind of Ars Poetica, as I mentioned.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it as an Ars Poetica. I thought of it like, it's the first book I wrote in the book. It's the first poem I wrote for this book. It's the one that predates all the others. So it comes at a time when, it comes at a point in the book where the speaker is reaching out, is making realizations. And the book is, I think, a kind of a difficult meandering through divorce out into life afterward. And so I think that the little poem, the small poem that opens up into telling the speaker to sing, feels simple and clean to me. So it's easier for me to talk about it in terms of what it does in the book. It resolves the book in a kind of joy and a place where the instruction to the self is to sing. But as an Ars Poetica, it's interesting to think of it that way because I think for me a lot of my poems are grounded in imagery that I see. A lot of my poems are imaginative and they go to who knows where. You know, what's happening in the beginning of the poem is not the same as what happens later, and there's a lot of imaginative space I like to wander in my poems. But this one grounds the eye of the speaker in the natural world, which I always appreciate.
I love the way you leap from image to image or thing to thing, whether it's a bear claw here, as you say, or a hawk or grass. You see, there's a kind of wonderful sort of unconscious inspiration here, where you're picking up these images off the top of your brain that are also obviously very significant to you, and you're talking to yourself. Yeah, which is fun. I think that's what poets are doing a lot of the time. It's talking to ourselves. Right. Yeah. There's a wonderful poem called Intersection in the book, which I think you've read a lot at various readings that you've done, and I would love you to read that poem as well, and then maybe talk about your strategy in this poem, because it's a similar strategy in a lot of your poems, where you start with a real situation, stopping at an intersection, and then just taking imaginative flight into a scenario that is fantastic, is imaginative, is surreal, but also very real at the same time, as far as the kind of the emotional reality or the emotional life that you're rendering there.
Okay. Do you like me to read it?
Sure. Would love you to.
Okay. Intersection. At the four-way stop, I wave you on, a kindness. You wave, no, you go. I wave, go. We keep on. You insist. Me, no, you, please. A bird shifts, a sigh. The penned horse tosses, pacing. I mouth, you go. There is a fleck on your windshield. I notice your hands. Rain falls. Your hands cup the wheel at 10 o'clock and 2, then float past my knee and only sometimes land. 100 times on my back, they tame me. Cars line up, birds lift. I nod my head into your chest. There is a trail of clothing. I walk to the plank door of your room. This takes hours and hours. This is a small cottage, and there is sand on the floor and nothing on the walls. Crows calling, dishes in the sink. Days go by. We are still making our way to the bed. This is an inventory. Black telephone, board games, frayed chairs, coffee table spotted with the old moons of drinks, curtains pulled back on tiny hooks, single pane glass windows, like the ones I used to sneak out of at night, lifting them as slow as this stepping. And when you talk into my neck, the words settle in the hammock of my collarbone, puddle there and spill, slide over my breasts, and I am slowly covered and rinsed. I do not close my eyes. Nothing hurts. The dust rises in swirls, dogs bark. You turn your windshield wipers on intermittent. Your car rolls into the space I have built between us. I am up to my belly in a northern lake, cold. I am afraid now. When I get home, everyone will see.
Now that's wonderful. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this poem. It's so mercurial and double.
Yeah, it's what do I want to say about it? I lost it. I found it. So when I write poems, I think I'm very much a poet of place, where I catch what I see and I use what I see. And so I don't usually make, I guess this is ironic to say because I make up a lot. I mean, a lot of it's just like, this is not even possible. But almost everything I catch to use in a poem as an image is something from where I've been, right? So this poem is built of, it's like a collage of places I care about, including the strange culture of intersections in Vermont, where we make these gestures to each other of like, no, you, like we're so polite, we're ridiculous. We're like, no, you, oh, me, you know, and we go back and forth tentatively. Right. And to me, that's always been a really intimate space. Yeah. The Vermont four-way stop. Right. Everyone's very polite. And I think that, you know, when this poem is dealing with a speaker, a woman who's realizing that there's something else possible. You know, she has an intimate moment in her mind in an intersection, which is completely absurd, and then is afraid that everyone will see it when she gets home, that it's going to be obvious that she's had this moment with this man that wasn't real, but it was in her mind.
Yeah.
And she feels suddenly kind of naked, like, whoa, what was that? But it's just an imagined scene. It's like that sort of desperation of imagining intimacy, and having it show.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, captures something really true, though,
I think so.
about the imagination and about fantasy. That especially an intense fantasy that we actually think that it's visible, or that it's apparent,
or that it's real,
Yeah, exactly.
I remember really distinctly, like reading *Prodigal Summer* by Barbara Kingsolver, and going for a walk one day down the road I lived on, and imagining that I would go visit this woman later in the day, but she was actually a character from the book, and I had to sort of shake my head like, wait, no, she's not real. She's not real. You know, but she was really vivid in my imagination.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about the irony of this? You know, that these unreal moments that are nonetheless powerfully true.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moments like that in the book, actually.
Yeah. I think that that all fiction is true, right? Like all poems are full of lies. All fiction is full of things we make up, but they all are true. All the fictions we make up are true in some level. Otherwise, they wouldn't resonate with people. I have always found great resonance in works of fiction and poetry and drama that are absurd. I've always loved theater of the absurd. I've always loved things that go to imaginative spaces that aren't possible. And I don't think I'm answering your question anymore at all.
No.
I'm just really excited by the idea of imagination.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're really sort of getting at the heart of what happens in myth. I mean, going back thousands and thousands of years, you know, a story like the one about Orpheus, for instance, is utterly absurd, about descending into the underworld to retrieve his beloved from Hades, and then succeeding for a moment, and then turning around to find that she's gone at the door of Erebus. I mean, it's an absurd story, but it's utterly true about longing and grief and the sense that the idea that we can retrieve what's lost when we can't. So I mean, you're doing a similar thing. This idea of the absurd, as you said, or the imaginative, which scenarios that can be both lyrical and narrative are vital to understanding ourselves as human beings. Yeah,
and I think that. So for me, as a young child, I went to church a lot. We went to Catholic church, which is a religion that's full of stories that stretch the imagination.
Right.
You know, and then they're told with a flat-footed truth.
Yeah.
You know, and then we listen to them, and then they become the way to live. They become, well, that means that you're supposed to do this because the story, this happens in the story. So if you act in this way, that may come true for you. There's sort of lovely superstition of religion, you know, that if we hear a story, we can take it into ourselves and live our lives in that way, and then get some benefit from it. I think myth is like that too. You can call it like in this story where, you know, but your personal risk is small because it's not real.
Yeah.
You know.
Right.
I love that. I've always loved stories that play with what's real and then are told, like Waiting for Godot. That play. Like, there's no way to understand it as a true thing, but it's deeply true.
Right.
It's deeply true that we're that lonely and we're waiting for something we don't know if it's ever going to show up. It's deeply, deeply true.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting that when Beckett brought that play to this country, he showed it in prisons, and where apparently he had the most powerful responses to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You actually have a poem about loneliness.
I have
a couple of poems.
I have a lot of poems about
loneliness. And I wonder
loneliness.
maybe you might want to read
Sure.
one of those.
Sure.
There's one called No Longer Lonely, I think, or
Yeah.
there's another one just simply called, I'm trying to find one of them here.
Once I Was Not Lonely.
Once I Was Not Lonely,
Yeah.
yes. What page is that on?
It's on page 52.
Yeah.
Do you want me to read it?
Sure.
Okay. Oh, and before I read it, can I say something about loneliness?
Absolutely.
I think people always ask me about loneliness in my poems, and what's interesting to me about it is I'm interested in loneliness. Like, I think it's a beautiful concept to think of ourselves as alone and then with others. Like, I don't know how to explain what I'm thinking about it, but I'm not a lonely person, but I'm obsessed with loneliness. Like, I'm obsessed with it. I'm obsessed with, like, how alone am I? Who am I by myself? How am I with other people? And how, at one time when I was younger, a teacher said something about how we can never know anybody, ever. And that thought has just become this beautiful kind of beacon to me. But poetry is a way to try that.
Because of the mystery in it?
Yeah. Yeah, and the utter, your brain is inside your head. You're inside yourself. And everything you do to reach someone else is about all of your senses trying to get as close to someone, which is impossible.
Yeah.
You can never really know somebody else, but that beautiful yearning, I really am fascinated by that.
Right.
Once I was not lonely. Once I was not lonely. I did not worry about whether I was loved. I was 2 and laughed at old women, stole their canes. I was 5 and begged the milkman for ice and kicked it in the street. I was 10 and accused everyone of cheating at kickball, threw balls at other children from a speeding bicycle. I was 12, 13, and was still an island that, despite appearances, did not drift in the sound with the tides. The houses were small, cedar shingled, shuttered with green shutters. Gulls sat on the roof lines. None of the houses faced the others. This is the kind of island I was. Boats came back and forth, mostly working boats, weathered and painted with working names. None said, "for sale," or "not working." The engines blatted and the sails flapped. The waves were calm and were not calm. They were breath. Once I was not lonely. I looked east and west, drew lines north and south, watched while the sun drew arcs through unanswerable skies.
So, did you feel you were having a kind of ecstatic moment at this time when you felt one with almost everything?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what you can do in a poem.
Yeah.
You can paint a moment and give it to somebody else where you, even if you're pretending that you were having an ecstatic moment.
Right.
Right? I can create an ecstatic moment.
Well, it's convincing.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have a poem called The Death of the Reader. And at the end of it you write, "This is the heartbreak I am after. Not the one after the marriage, the long marriage, the 40 open acres of marriage, the 50-page ending, just the snapping open of a valve, the chamber squeezing like a fist, my heart breaking like a bird's egg, untended, desiccated, sparkling in the evening light, so beautiful, so light and diaphanous, it almost doesn't fall." Now, to sort of follow up on your idea of loneliness, or not being lonely at that one moment, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this poem in which there's a longing here, in which you also realize something as important as you did in that poem about not being lonely.
Can you clarify your question?
So this catalog.
I just got lost in thought.
No, that's okay. This catalog at the end of this poem. Not.
Yeah.
If you could, which is a kind of fugue in the poem.
Yeah.
If you could just talk a little bit about it.
I can tell you also. Is it interesting where it came from?
Yeah.
Where the ending list catalog comes from? This poem has kind of a funny genesis. which involves suddenly realizing that I can't read anymore and that I'm not able to read. You know, the death of the reader is like a very literal impulse for me. The triggering moment of I would put books down and be like, why don't I love reading anymore? And in the end, the funny story is I needed bifocals, right?
Oh, really? It was literally couldn't read anymore.
Yeah, but then it became this imaginative space, you know, like the reader and not being able to read since the divorce, right? So like that whole, I thought it was more emotional. And all of the images in this book are from novels I've loved. That I've been unable to finish, or that I've loved and I've enjoyed, or they were present for me in the moment. So all of the images from the middle are stolen.
I should have picked up on that.
Well, there's like Madame Bovary, there's Out Stealing Horses, there's all these disconnected, all the scenes that aren't true. You know, people sometimes think I've killed my own twin, which I haven't. You know, that's a scene from a book. But at the end, there's a scene in Per Peterson's Out Stealing Horses, where the boy climbs a tree and it's the most beautiful scene in a book to me. And they climb a tree, and now I forget exactly what happens, but there's this egg. They drop the desiccated bird eggs out of the nest, and the scene stayed with me. And then when I was writing about it, that scene's a scene of great heartbreak, you know, sort of loss of innocence. Where the bird egg falls. Yes. So that's where that came from, in this beautiful moment of something gorgeous falling. Yeah, but maybe you could talk then just a little bit about about that sort of dialectic between not reading, having to stop reading in order to think about what you've read, maybe in order to write, and these powerful novels that become a part of you, psychically, emotionally. Yeah, when I was a young girl, I read. I didn't read literature, you know, until I picked up Tess of the D'Urbervilles by accident. By Hardy. Yeah. I thought it was like a romance novel. I was like, oh, a romance novel. Yeah. And I read it, and it rocked my gut. You know, just the notion that you could lose a character, that a character would die. And I love novels that are difficult to move through, because what happens to the characters is awful. I love, and it's slow. Madame Bovary. I love Emma Bovary's slow, purposeful demise. Not because I don't think I'm a sadist, but because I think it's so beautifully and patiently rendered, right? So I love books like that. I love difficult stories a lot. Probably for the catharsis that they offer. But in this poem, there was a time when I would read books and I would find them so beautiful. I think it's as a poet, right? You come to a scene like this bird. I wish I had reread the bird's egg scene before we came today. But you read a scene that's so ineffably beautiful and so powerful. And I would sometimes take a book and just be like, okay, and just put it down. And, you know, like put it down on my bedside table and then never pick it back up. Because I just couldn't. I couldn't. I needed it to end in that beautiful spot. You know, so I have a number of books I haven't finished. Because I have kind of a romantic attachment to where I was. You get to a scene and you can't read it any further. I can't even look at it anymore. It's so beautiful. So. If we could shift to what you do in your day job for a second, with this in mind, the power of great literature and its effect on you. You teach high school at Montpelier High School. You teach students to write as well as to read. Could you, I mean, you've done this now for many years. How many years have you taught? 26. 26 years. And won Teachers Awards there and been very successful. Especially today when reading seems to be
reading great fiction, for instance, in this country, sort of on the decline because of this information age that we live in and all of the propaganda that we hear every day. Just how you go about teaching students to read literature in a way that means something to them and changes their lives.
Oh boy, I find, well, just to be really honest, I find myself, it's June, you're talking to a teacher in June.
At the end of the year.
At the end of the year. Let's just pause there for a second.
Yeah.
I feel a great deal of despair about reading in young people. And just yesterday I made the joke to somebody that I don't teach students, I teach phones. Because I spend so much of my time navigating what, you know, when I was in school, the secret bad thing you could do was to pass a note to a friend, like scribble a note and like get it to somebody. And that was an enormous amount of work, you know, but still utterly satisfying.
Exactly.
But students now, by and large, they can't moderate their relationship with their phones. And most students say that they don't read outside of school. They don't have time. And I think a lot of it is that they don't have time where they're untethered from other people's needs. They're constantly tethered to each other and Snapchat, and I mean, and it sounds really superficial, but it's a kind of connection that they crave. Everybody craves it. Yeah. You know, and it's a really sexy kind of connection. You can say something to somebody and they like when I was a kid I dreamed about this. You know, what if we had phones where we could see each other while we talked? I mean,
now
I
we
remember,
do.
Now we do.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's so good. So I keep trying to come up with ways to get students to read books. And sometimes it's, here's a quiz that you can't answer unless you've read the book, which is an impossible amount of work. Sometimes it's you can choose your own book. My newest fantasy is making students put Post-it notes throughout the book to like get transparent Post-it notes.
And read passages.
And read passages but have them make notes that are relevant to each page that I can spot check. And have to have a certain number of them. Like I'm desperate for a way to get students to read.
But you must have a certain percentage of students who discover literature and the joy of reading.
I have students who enjoy reading. They're overworked at school. And
Poetry in particular.
Well, poetry, yes. My creative writing class is a different story. These are students who they're more interested in self-expression than reading poetry. They're much more interested in learning how to write, and they do write beautiful poems. And they can take one poem that they've read and they can learn from it. I mean, that's a different story. But picking up a novel is very different. It's hard to get students to read novels. Right. In my experience, I would like to. We're talking about ways to remove phones from. I don't want to talk about phones. I don't mean to keep. But it's a problem.
No, it is a huge problem. I have the same problem. Yeah.
But often it's getting students to love literature. They need to be able to see themselves in it. Yeah. Right. They need to, and so.
And do they respond more readily to poetry than they do to fiction?
Yes.
Because it's shorter?
It's quicker. It's easier, it's more startling. It requires less patience to get through, right? Like a novel requires that you keep turning pages. You keep doing this. You sit for hours and hours, but a poem can just like startle you. And I think poetry has a quicker impact on kids. Yeah.
Before we end here, I want to ask you about your new work and the sort of new direction you're headed. You wrote this book, Landscape with Plywood Silhouettes, actually before you went to your MFA program. It's
true.
Interesting. Most of these poems at Warren Wilson College, and now you're working on a second book, and maybe you could talk a little bit about where you're headed next.
I think I have a second book almost finished, and I don't know what the title is yet, but it's where this book is a single speaker navigating a life out of divorce and into new life, new territory. The second book is more a composite so far. It's a composite of stories of my own from growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a brother who's he's a heroin addict. And so there's some opioid crisis poems in there. On a personal level, I also was able to start going back to Ireland through my NEA fellowship, which was a tremendous gift, literally. So I started going back to Ireland and met my family over there, and I go stay on my grandfather's farm and hang out with my cousins. And we were not ever supposed to know who they were when I was a kid. They were like, oh, we're Americans now. You know, like, oh, why do you want to know about that? I sometimes wonder if my grandmother would be happy or sad that I've gone back and found everybody. Well, they wanted us to make, they made a lot of sacrifices to come here.
Yeah.
And they wanted us to be American.
And that meant leaving Ireland behind.
Yeah. I think it did. And when we were kids, it wasn't so easy to just go back, you know. So the book's a mix of going home to Ireland, right? Like exile and removal of exile, suburban stories, current work, current life stories of my own, but all full of imagination, loneliness, and, and catalogs of things I see.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've remarried?
I have.
And
recently, yeah.
Yeah. And are writing poems about your new life?
So the third book.
Yeah.
I think this is. I'm kind of giddy about it because I'm excited to get working on it. For years, I've been writing these funny little poems about their love poems to Evel Knievel.
Oh, I think you told me about
this.
Yes.
And they're, you know, but they get to explore the imaginative landscape of like love in the middle of life. Yeah. You know, he's kind of a broken man. Yeah. Right. He's,
well, literally.
Literally, and that's fun for my imagination.
He broke every bone in his body.
Yeah. I have a poem I wrote called "Field Guide to Evel Knievel's Broken Bones."
Now, where did this idea?
I don't know. I don't know. There's like I just was sitting one day and I was like, Evel Knievel, like. Wow, Evel Knievel was a weird guy. Yeah. Like, I wonder what it would be like to write a love poem to him. And then I started, and they allow me to be kind of a naive speaker, and he's kind of like this expert, but then he kind of shows the way. Yeah. But then he's also kind of embarrassing, and so it's this really fun character. It's just it's like a novel. Right.
Well, is there a poem you'd like to read? A new poem that we could end with?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh boy, one poem that I would like to read. I could read you one of the Evel Knievel poems.
Sure.
Okay. This is called "In the Glow of Half-Life," and Half-Life is a video game.
That's right.
Right.
Okay.
Evel spends these nights killing zombies in the basement. He tells me it's March, 34 degrees and rain, when I look at him sideways. The yard is still covered in snow. I make dinner and resent it, his 4 servings of vegetables and my eye on his salt intake. This weekend he is up in Canada with physicists working on next-gen ideas for jumps. He makes wild claims and they crunch numbers and tell their new stuntman the plan. Evel is still everyone's idea man. I don't think people take chances much these days. No one just makes wild goes of it anymore. Last night I went downstairs to say goodnight. In the glow of half-life, he tilted his chin toward me as if to say, oh hey, I've spent all night in the training room. The jumps aren't working. In my mind I tell him I can tell. I tell him I'm sorry his best avatar is an approximation of me, so much younger. I perch on the arm of the couch for a minute, ask if he has tried to press crouch while walking, then quickly press jump and release crouch while holding forward. He makes a noise like a small boy thinking. I kiss his cheek and climb the stairs.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
I love where you go with your poems. They're just so wonderfully imaginative and real at the same time.
It was really fun to write.
Yeah. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you today,
Same here.
Kerrin, and good luck with all your new ventures,
Thank
your
you.
new poems, your teaching.
Thank you.
And I hope that we get a chance to talk again.
I hope, and I trust we will.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chard.
Thank you, Kerrin.
Thank you.